Regular rentals suck because there's so many hidden fees that hurt your cash flow. Maintenance costs, property managers' fees, and taxes just constantly going up. What if I told you there was a way to keep your houses as long-term investment properties where you don't have to deal with repairs, you don't have to deal with tenants, and you can collect your payments just like the bank, and you keep all your cash flow? That's exactly what I do using a method called the wrap, also known as a slow flip. My name is Chris A. Williams, owner, investor, and entrepreneur. And in this video, I'm gonna tell you exactly how you can do wraps or slow flips to make the most money from your real estate investment deals. So you no longer have to worry about the tiredness of being a landlord or the stress that comes with it if you do a wrap or a slow flip. So stay tuned to this video and I'll explain how you can do it step by step and how to maximize your investments. So this video is for investors, wholesalers, and landlords, or anybody just wanting passive income. You want to do the wrap strategy, also known, aka as a slow flip. For this video purposes, I'm going to call it a wrap because that's mostly what I commonly call it, but I do know a lot of people who will call it a slow flip also. Now, when we say wrap, emphasis W-R-A-P, not wrap as in rapper, but a wrap. And a wrap is an exit strategy that you'll take on when it comes to real estate, and emphasis on the exit strategy, meaning that you will exit from the property eventually, versus having a traditional rental. You can keep the property for however long you decide to keep it. But to define it, what you will do is you'll partake in an agreement for deed with the end buyer. And that end buyer, they basically will become your tenant and you become the bank. And this is great. Like I said earlier, you don't have to worry about repairs, maintenance, anything like that, because just like when you purchase your original property, the bank isn't caring about repairs, maintenance, or anything like that. All they're doing is just collecting their mortgage payments. So you take on that same exact role as the seller. And yes, I say you are the seller because in a sense, you quote unquote sold the property. But typically how I do it, at least, is an agreement for deed with a 30-year term. So one of my main concerns when I first did it was, well, I won't be able to keep the property forever like I will with the rental property. But you got to think the passive income that comes in every single month for 30 years, I should have done something with that and be able to flip it into bigger projects to make more money versus just having a regular rental where my cash flow can be cut by things occurring like, you know, the roof breaking, roof leaking, maintenance, all things like that will actually cut into my profits versus I don't have to deal with that for a wrap. So under a wrap, the buyer will stay in the property and they will make payments. So it's just like a regular tenant, right? But they're responsible for literally every single thing that goes on in the property. So if they come in the property and they break everything, all right, well, it's their fault. They're the ones who's living in it for however long they're in the property. But more often, under wraps, what they will do is they'll come in the property and they'll repair everything, they'll fix everything. So what happens is, God forbid, they decide to renege on their agreement. Well, what happens then? Well, then you would get the house back with all the repairs, all the upgrades that they've made, and then plus constantly real estate appreciating. You'd be able to do the same exact thing for a higher price, make more money, not just in the short term, but also in the long term. And the beautiful thing about wraps also, y'all, that you need to know is traditional rentals, you don't get a down payment. All you're doing is collecting your payments monthly. But under your wraps, you also get a down payment because this is seller finance in a sense. This is very creative that we're getting to. This is just another method of creative financing, but a more exit strategy, I'll say, of creative financing. So this is huge because you could get huge, insane returns for your cash on cash return where other agreements you just simply can't. Now, why I have most of my long-term investment properties as wraps instead of traditional rentals is because there's way less risk doing it with a wrap and you can make more money. So as I mentioned before, under a wrap, you get a down payment up front, and also you'll typically get more than your typical rental rate in the area because this is seen as more a riskier loan in a sense, right? So think about your traditional bank. There's prime, there's the regular rates and things like that. But once you get into more riskier loans that they'll deem, they charge a higher interest rate, right? So it's the same exact thing with you with a wrap because basically you become the bank in a sense. You can charge a higher interest rate, means more monthly payment for you. So it just makes huge cash flow which you can have, and there's so many benefits to it. Now you may be thinking, Chris, all right, well, what if that end buyer, when they come in, what if they decide that they want to sell the property? What happens then? And I'm glad you asked that because that was one of my biggest concerns. I was like, man, I just want to keep the monthly money that's coming in for this 30-year period. I don't really want the money or else I would have done a flip. Well, you got to think about it, right? So if that buyer, that end buyer, they do decide to sell that property, guess what you get? A lump sum, also known as a balloon payment, to your account. So even though you don't have the house anymore and you're not getting your monthly payment, you're going to get that huge sum from it. And that makes your cash on cash return pretty crazy. And with these end buyers for wraps, it's less turnover and more stable cash in your pocket. And I say it's less turnover because when you have a traditional tenant, after their lease is up, they could just go somewhere else with really no penalty to them. And also, what if they decide to break their lease? There's not too much recourse. Also having to deal with evictions, things like that, that can get pretty hectic. Versus the end buyer on the wrap, because they put a down payment, then even if they just completely renege on their agreement, at least you made money on the down payment. And also you can repeat the same exact thing with another end buyer and collect another down payment for it. And also because they did put that down payment down there in this agreement for deed for however long, they're very less likely to renege on the agreement, because then in a sense it would be like foreclosure. And that's not something that they would do. They put all this money into the deal. They put all this time. They put this love, care. They see this house as their own now. So more than often, they're going to stick through with it. But even if they don't stick through with it, it's actually in your advantage as an investor, to be honest with you, if they don't stick through with it, because you'll make more money that way. So under agreement for deed also too, it's important to mention, as I discussed in our other videos, how important title is and how important the deed is. So if you purchase a house regularly under a traditional loan, the mortgage will be in your name, but also the deed will be in your name too. Under agreement for deed, the deed still stays in your name, even though you have an end buyer in there and in a sense you quote unquote sold the house. But because it's an agreement for deed, once that term is up, then the buyer gets the deed. So think 30 years from now, if you have a traditional agreement for deed model, in 30 years, that buyer will actually get the deed. Then they have full control, full possession of the property. But until that time is up, you still have the deed. So you actually do control the property. And in a sense, that end buyer is quote unquote your tenant. They're just a very high paying and low maintenance tenant. And with these end buyers for wraps, you don't have to worry about any maintenance. Like I said, you don't have to worry about those 2 a.m. maintenance calls, them constantly asking for repairs, things like that, because in a sense, this is quote unquote their house, or they're working towards it being their house. So they're responsible for literally everything that goes on in the property. So if they decide to upgrade it, they decide to downgrade it, that's all on them and whatever they want. But it's in your benefit if they do upgrade it too, because like I said before, if they decide to renege on an agreement, cool, sell it for more money and repeat the same process, rinse and repeat again and again. So now we understand what a wrap is and why I suggest you use this strategy. Let's talk about how it actually works. So let's look right here, right? So first thing you're going to do is you're going to buy a property. You can buy the property however. You can use cash, you can use hard money, you can buy it creative financing, or you can buy it with traditional, whatever, it doesn't matter. So you buy the property, and of course, every time you buy a property, there is some type of upfront cost. Now what happens next? We flow to the next step in the funnel, which is where you begin the wrap process. So to find the end buyer for the wrap, what you're going to do is you're just going to look for a specific end buyer that is willing to do that. They will provide you with a down payment, and then they'll also give you their monthly payment. And the beautiful thing is, because let's say you bought your house and you still have a mortgage on it of, let's say, $2,000, right? So you have your monthly mortgage of $2,000 and it costs you, let's say, $10,000 to buy this house, right? All right, $10,000. Now your wrap buyer, they're going to provide you with the down payment. You're going to resell it to them for, let's say, you're going to look at the market value and things like that. But their down payment, let's say give or take, they give you a down payment of $20K. And remember, for these, you could charge a bit more expensive down payment because these are seen as more riskier loans. And then they'll give you a monthly of $2,500. All right. So you have this separate agreement with the end buyer, and that basically just wraps around. That's why we call it a wrap, because your end buyer will wrap around what you already have. So in this example, you're cash flowing plus every month $500, and because they gave you a $20K down payment. All right, let's subtract 20 from 10. Okay, so basically you made money to do this because your end buyer, they gave you 20K, it only cost you 10K to buy the house. So you basically are in the positive immediately. Your cash on cash return is insane, literally immediately, and then you're cash flowing $500 every single month. And under the wrap, because the deed is still in your name, the mortgage and such is still in your name, you still get all the benefits from Uncle Sam, all the tax benefits and things like that for owning real estate. Also goes to your net worth and so on. So you may ask, Chris, all right, how do I determine what the payment is going to be for this end buyer? Well, one, you just want to look at the comps, right? So comps, if you don't know what comps are, check out my other videos so you can figure out what comps are. But once you know the comps, you'll just see what is the sales price there, and then set a reasonable interest rate. Remember, you could charge a bit higher than the market rate, but don't go too crazy. Like if the market rate is, let's say 7%, you don't want to charge 50% because nobody's going to bite on your deal. But you know, people will pay what the market determines. And if you got a hot market, you can charge a little bit more. If you got a very hot property, you could charge a little bit more too. So you can get flexible with that. That's why I do love this strategy, because you can set it to be whatever you want. There is no set standard. If you want to charge 20% for your interest rate, cool. You want to charge 1% for your interest rate, cool. You want to charge 10K for your down payment, cool. You want to charge 1K for your down payment, cool. You want to charge 100K for your down payment, whatever. As long as the deal works and as long as somebody's willing to do it. Now that buyer, if you guys didn't know, your monthly mortgage is made of 4 things: PITI, principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. Now that end buyer, typically they're just going to be paying the principal and interest, but it still factors in, because even though you have the monthly mortgage with those 4 things in there, if you have a mortgage on the property, well, because you're getting a higher interest rate with that end buyer, it still will wrap around. And if you set the deal right, it'll still cover whatever your monthly mortgage is. Now you may ask, okay, what about that buyer? What if they decide they want to refinance or things like that? You can give the buyer the ability to do it, and you can give the buyer the ability to sell it also, because you have to give them the ability to sell it. Like they can't just be stuck there for forever. But what happens in the case if they decide to refinance it or sell it? They can refinance it into their name, but just as a normal bank would happen, when it's a refinance, guess what? You get that lump sum given to you. Perfect. Now you don't have to deal with the property ever again or anything like that, and you just get a lump sum, a huge balloon payment. Same thing that happens if they decide to sell the property, and you don't have to deal with any of that stress or anything that goes on when it comes to selling. Just, it's easiest to think of yourself as the bank whenever you're doing a wrap. I actually want to give you my real story on how I did a wrap and breaking down all the numbers and everything and how it worked for me. So this is a special gift. I'm going to get personal. Usually I don't like to talk about my personal numbers too much, but hey, for the education of the people, we're going to do it. So Chris's wrap, a real life example. This is a property that I purchased in Norfolk, Virginia last year. To buy the property, it only cost me $3,700 because I purchased it via subject to creative financing. And all I had to do was just pay the seller's closing costs and pay my closing costs. So approximately, I believe it was about $3,700. And then because I took a subject to, her existing mortgage was still in place and her mortgage was $1,700. Now, I acquired that property, and within a day, I found an end buyer to do the wrap. Now that wrap, the down payment for that end buyer was $12K. So as you guys can see, it only cost me $3,700 to purchase the property. So literally immediately I made money from my investment. And then the payment that the end buyer gives me per month is $2,500. And okay, as you see, I'm cash flowing $800 a month. And because it's an agreement for deed, for 30 years, I get to cash flow $800 a month, and I already got my initial investment back. So that speaks into what is the cash on cash return. If you don't know what cash on cash return is, you should definitely know that metric as a real estate investor. Now, the average cash on cash return for, let's say, a single family residential home at the time of this video, say 6 to 10%. And that just depends on what area that you're in, to be honest with you, because a lot of times they're factoring in, you know, it can be more expensive to purchase properties. But because I did a very creative model using this and I did a wrap, instead of that 6 to 10% average return, what I got was a 584% cash on cash return, which is literally insane. Might be a record for all I know. So 584% cash on cash return versus a 10% cash on cash return, which would be seen as pretty much excellent, you know, to the average market. This is why I love wraps, because I just broke down the numbers for you all to visibly see. Like, this is the numbers. Wraps really work. You got to think also too, under a wrap, my cash flow is always going to stay the same. I don't have to pay a property manager. I don't have to pay maintenance. I don't have to do repairs. None of that. I'm always gonna get that 800 a month cash flow. So it's beautiful. And oh, did I forget to mention, this cash on cash return isn't over the life term of the loan. This is literally just year one is my cash on cash return. So factor that in. And as I was running the math, also remember this property cost me $3,700 to buy. If I stretch this end buyer over an entire 30-year period and we really look at the math, that $3,700 really turned to about $300,000 over a 30-year term. So it's, a great way to do investment. Very low risk, not too much money required, less stress. It's a winner. So now you've seen everything that, the wrap and how it really works, real life examples. So you're like, man, I need to do this. Like, what do I need? Okay, so all you need is really just an agreement for deed. You just need the proper paperwork. I do my own agreement for deed. Other people may do different things, but just get that agreement for deed paperwork. You can get that from your local title company. And then that's really all you need. You don't need like a whole elaborate 20-page contract or anything like that. Just have an agreement for deed where you're making sure all parties are protected, not just yourself. Remember, we're not selfish here. We're going to protect our end buyers as investors too. We're going to protect the other party. We're not just going to take advantage of people. So just get that necessary paperwork, and you don't even really need a title company or an attorney, things like that. I probably would suggest it when you're doing that, but of course it's going to take your costs up a little bit. Just have someone that you trust, likely have a notary, making sure that these docs are officially notarized. Now you're like, okay, this is interesting. I'm really interested in it, but it seems too good to be true. That's what I thought when I first found out about the wrap strategy. I'm like, all right, I'm missing something here. It just seems too good to be true. Now, there's always a downside for anything. There's always some sort of risk when this does happen. So really, the risk for a wrap is really mitigated though. The only major risk I would say is if you have to deal with evictions, because your end buyer, basically they're like a tenant in a sense. So if they don't pay your monthly payment, just as like the bank, right? If you don't pay your mortgage to the bank, what do? They can't necessarily evict you, but in a sense they can, because they can foreclose on the property. They can take the property and do whatever they choose to do with it. So in your essence, as the landlord for a wrap, it would be the same thing. If your end buyer, they just decide to stop paying, you have to go through with the eviction process. But that's also why it's important to set your contract up the right way too, because at least for me, I have clauses in my contract that states exactly what happens if they decide to stop paying, the exact recourse and everything that will happen. So one, just discourages the end buyer up front from having to engage in any of that, because they don't want that recourse to happen. And also two, is clearly in the black and white. So if it does go to court, it's already settled before it even goes to court. No gray areas or anything like that. So that would really be the only risk that I'll say under this strategy. Or I don't think this is a risk necessarily, but if you really, really want to keep your properties forever, if you want to, let's say, give them to your kids and things like that, this likely is not the best strategy for you, because remember, this is based on a certain timeline, on a 30-year timeline. Me personally, I am thinking okay, cool. Even if I don't need these properties in 30 years, because I plan on upgrading from just single family residential to other bigger projects that I will keep in my portfolio. Other ways to make sure yourself is protected is get a sizable down payment. If you get a down payment of $500, and you will probably get some bad things to happen, because there's really no investment there. But if you get a sizable down payment, it's actually going to hurt if they don't follow the rules and standards of the contract. That's a big thing that I want to say. Make sure your contract is rock solid. If you are brand new and you haven't done this before, you should partner up with somebody who has done these before, or speak to a title company that can provide you a contract, a rock solid contract, title company or attorney. Another way you can protect yourself is using third-party authorization for payments, things like that. A lot of time these buyers, they can pay with cash, or they can pay with Zelle, or they can pay with some of these things, but they're gonna want a receipt also too, to save your time and to just make sure everybody's protected digitally or with real documents, is use a third-party servicing thing. So there's a paper trail regardless. And you can also use that too to pay your mortgage, so you don't have to worry about that. I know at least for mine, I have all my mortgages on auto pay, because I'm doing a lot of things, honestly. I'll forget to pay a mortgage, but using third party can help out a lot. So your end buyers, people will always ask, where can I find these end buyers that are willing to do this wrap strategy? Well, what you want to look for typically is people who can't get approved for a traditional loan. Whether that is young people, could be old people, it could be people not from here, it could be people from here, it could be people with bad credit scores, whatever it is. These are the exact people that you're looking for. because the traditional person who can purchase a home using a traditional method, typically they want to go that route because a lot of times it could be less money up front, and also the interest rate may be a bit better. But this is a riskier loan on your behalf, so you do have the right to have a higher down payment. You do have the right to have a higher interest rate. So who are you going to find? The people who can't purchase traditionally. So that is your ideal target audience, but they go so quick, man. I will say, like, I work heavily on the real estate agency side also too. I have the team, I have the brokerage, all that. So I see how long homes typically sit on the market versus these homes will go like in a day. My wraps will literally go in like one day. Like they go so quick because there's such a high market for them. There's so many people in America who do want home ownership that just simply can't achieve it under the traditional methods for whatever reason that is. So honestly, y'all, this is a pretty foolproof method, I would say. But if I had to think of any mistakes to avoid, the only mistakes I would say to avoid would be, you probably want to check your end buyer, just check their credit score, check to see do they have funds in the bank, do like a basic background check, all these things like you would for a traditional tenant. But I would say you don't even have to do that, because you got to think, if that buyer does default, you just got to deal with the eviction process, which can be a headache, but in the end, you'll make more money actually doing the same process with somebody else. And the only other mistake that I would say that you could make is, of course, if you forget about like getting your payments and all that. So I think that's why it's super important that you do use a third party to be able to collect payments and have that coordinated. And actually, y'all, the biggest mistake, and you could definitely make this, is if you don't have the proper paperwork. So get the proper paperwork. Even if you have to pay somebody to get the paperwork, get the proper paperwork. Because in this, if you don't have the proper paperwork, if you even have a tiniest little loophole in your contract, you could lose your house. You could lose all the money that not only that you invested up front, but all the money that's coming in the future. So make sure you have the proper paperwork. That's literally the number one most important thing anytime you're doing a real estate investment deal. The beautiful thing about wraps are they allow you to act like the bank and not like just another landlord. And this is great. This is amazing for long-term investments, and it's also good for a short form too. I know, like, I've been able to recoup a lot of money from houses that I bought, and just by doing the wrap, just by getting the down payment back. And it's just insane cash on cash return. So it's a huge, huge win. So if you guys are doing wraps or you're interested in doing wraps, let me know in the comments below. I'm curious to see everybody else's stories. If you guys have a similar story on how you had an insane cash on cash return or a great investment deal using this strategy, let me know. And if you want any more information on real estate or real estate investing, watch the next video.